Awareness, the final frontier. These are the explorations of Jonathan Robinson and Brian Tom O'Connor. Their continuing mission, to discover fresh new paths to the mystery within, to seek out new joys and new methods of awakening, to boldly go into the heart of expanded consciousness. This is Awareness Explorers.
I want to welcome all our friends to Awareness Explorers, where we look at how to wake up, not just why or what. And today we have a special guest who my co-host Brian will be introducing. But if you know anything about me and my books, you know that I've interviewed literally over 70 spiritual leaders over the last 20 years. And everybody from the late Mother Teresa to the Dalai Lama. And when I meet these people, I'm always interested in what their perspective is, not just in specific techniques, but also in what they've learned, in that they've been able to speak to so many people and see how this thing called awareness or consciousness is changing. And today we are super honored to have Rupert Spira, who is one of the leading voices in consciousness and awakening, is a well-known spiritual teacher in England. Of course, Brian will give more of his background, but when we meet people who have this perspective of being in front of so many people, it can be very valuable to learn exactly what they know, because they have a perspective that you and I don't get just talking to a couple friends and reading books. So without further ado, why don't you give our listeners a little bit of background about Rupert?
Okay, thanks, Jonathan. I'm going to read a little excerpted version of Rupert's bio from his website, and then talk a little bit about how I first heard of Rupert. Rupert Spira is a spiritual teacher. Actually, I've heard him describe himself simply as a friend, who lives in Oxford, UK, and holds meetings and retreats all over the world. His influences, beginning with Rumi at an early age, also include non-dual teachers such as Krishnamurti and Ramana Maharshi. Then, in the mid-1990s, he met his teacher, Francis Lucille, whose first words Rupert heard were, "Meditation is a universal yes to everything." Francis introduced Rupert to the direct path teachings of Atmananda Krishna Menon and the tantric approach of Kashmir Shaivism, which Francis had received from his teacher, Jean Klein. Of the essence of these years, Rupert writes, "The greatest discovery in life is to discover that our essential nature does not share the limits nor the destiny of the body and mind." Now, about 3 or 4 years ago, I was on Amazon.com and looking through one of my favorite parts of Amazon. Customers who bought this book also bought, and I came across a book by Rupert Spira. So I picked it up and read it, and I was so impressed. I thought it was wonderful. It felt like it spoke directly to me. So I went to his website and started reading and listening to the material there and watching videos. And then I noticed there was a meetup here in New York. So for the last 3 or 4 years or so, I've been going every week to this meetup where we watch videos of Rupert leading guided meditations and answering questions at his retreats. And there's really a very lively community of people here who love Rupert and love to hear his teachings. And I count myself as one of them. So, Rupert, we're very, very excited that you are our first guest on the Awareness Explorers podcast. So my heartfelt thanks to you for joining us.
Thank you, Brian and Jonathan. Pleasure to be here.
So, Rupert, my first question to you, being that you get to speak to a lot of people and you're seeing how this field is changing, and I'm sure you're aware, as I am, that over a 10 to 15 year period, there's a lot going on in this field, and it's opening. People are using different methods and such. So I'm wondering what you see now is really helpful to people, that really resonates with them, and also what you see are common obstacles to people getting to the next phase of awakening.
I think the most helpful thing for people is the discovery of what is sometimes called the direct path. The direct path, meaning that we go directly from wherever we find ourselves in experience to our true nature of pure awareness. Now, in the traditional progressive paths, a long period of purification of the body and mind are required, are considered prerequisites for the recognition of our essential nature. And really the revelation of the direct path, which is now much more widely available than it ever used to be, is that in whatever condition one finds oneself, however prepared or unprepared, however long one has or has not been on a spiritual path, one can go directly to one's true nature. And I think this is perhaps the biggest change that I've seen over the last 20 or 30 years.
And with the direct path, do you see that there are obstacles that people face in that path that may not have occurred in some of the more gradual paths?
The main obstacle is the belief that there are obstacles. The direct path is the pathway from oneself to oneself. So it's not even really a pathway, although for one who is lost in experience, that is in thoughts, images, feelings, activities, relationships, it is legitimate in the early stages to describe it as a pathway. But really we are going from ourself to ourself, which doesn't really require a path. If, for instance, if I were to ask you now, stand up and take a step towards yourself, what would you do?
Wouldn't be able to do it.
You're already standing at yourself.
Mhm.
So the direct path is the pathless path from ourself to ourself. But as I say, as a concession to those who are lost in the drama of experience, it is legitimate in the early stages to speak of tracing our way back from the objective content of our experience, that is our thoughts, images, feelings, etc., to our essential, irreducible, self-aware being.
And since it's so ridiculously simple in that way, do you mostly guide people back through guided meditations, or do you give them any instruction?
Well, it's a combination of both guided meditations, guided contemplations, and conversations that are responses to people's questions, their difficulties, the apparent obstacles. So the teaching really, I don't have a teaching as such. The teaching evolves in the moment in response to questions. Mm-hmm. Depending on the question or the comment or the observation. So I try to meet the question of where they are, and then we really start walking, as it were, start exploring, investigating from the perspective of the person, and we'll take the quickest and most direct route back to our true nature from the person's starting point.
So it really is individual for each person.
Well,
or rather, the starting point is individual, maybe not the ending point.
Exactly. The end point is always the same, which is that just simply the recognition of our essential self. But depending on where we start, the pathway may seem to differ, at least in the early stages. Yes.
Mm-hmm. And how would you define that self, the one that we can't actually get up and walk away from?
Well, of course, I am sure that you and all of your listeners understand that ultimately it cannot be described. However, we don't want to sit here in silence for an hour. So let's do our best with words to describe that which is essentially undescribable. Why is it undescribable? Because our words are designed to describe the objective content of our experience. Words are reasonably good at describing our thoughts, our activities, our relationships, our perceptions, etc. But when we try to explore what it is that knows or is aware of our objective experience, that itself is not an objective experience and therefore lies outside the remit of language. Language can only describe something objective. And awareness, or our true nature, is that which illuminates or renders all objective experience knowable, but is not itself an objective experience. It is that which knows our thoughts, but is not itself a thought. It is that which is aware of our feelings and sensations, but it's not itself a feeling or a sensation. It is that which experiences our perceptions, but it's not itself a perception. So it is the knowing element or the experiencing element in all experience, but which is not itself an experience or an object of knowledge.
Right. Yes.
And therefore can never be accurately spoken of, let alone defined or described.
But I have found that when asking the questions, for instance, you suggest asking, am I aware? Or sometimes you've said, be knowingly the presence of awareness.
Yes.
That when I do that and sort of just allow things to be as they are and look from that place, in other words, look at the objects of experience from awareness itself, that I feel flooded with happiness.
Absolutely right. Why? Because happiness is the nature of consciousness.
Uh-huh.
So when we withdraw or even relax the focus of our attention from the objects of experience and allow it, as it were, to sink backwards or inwards towards the subject, the knower of experience. The knower, it doesn't come into focus because it can't be focused on, but its presence becomes felt. Mm-hmm. And with its presence, comes its innate peace and joy. So immediately there is this sense of ease or relaxation and sometimes a feeling of joy or happiness.
So happiness is actually our true nature.
Yes, and it's not an extraordinary happiness or a mystical happiness or a happiness that only the likes of the Buddha or Christ or Lao Tzu or Ramana Maharshi knew about. It's just ordinary, common happiness, the only happiness there is. In fact, every time anybody experiences peace or happiness or love, they are, without necessarily realizing it, tasting their essential self, their true nature. And it is for this reason that all people, and when I say all people, I don't just mean those relatively few of us who are interested in spiritual matters or in non-duality, but all 7 billion of us seek happiness, love happiness above all else, which means that really all 7 billion of us seek our true nature, our essential being, before anything else. In fact, if we were to conduct a survey of all 7 billion people and ask what is it in life that you long for the most, to begin with, people may say, I would like better health or a family or an intimate relationship or more wealth or whatever. But if we were then to ask them, why do you want these things? They would all answer, because I think they will make me happy. In other words, it is not really the object, the health, the wealth, the relationship, etc., that we want. We only want those as means to getting what we really want, which is happiness. And enlightenment is just the exotic word for happiness, for peace and happiness.
Mm-hmm. That's great news.
If we were to ask, if I were to ask you, if you were sure that enlightenment would make you miserable, would you seek it?
No.
Of course not. Nobody would in their right mind. So it's not really enlightenment that we long for. We only want enlightenment because we believe it is the ultimate key to what we truly want, which is simply peace and happiness.
Well, that's so lovely and such a relief, and it dovetails so wonderfully with what we've always thought our podcast, Awareness Explorers, is about. About awareness, yes, but ultimately about happiness.
Yes. Yes.
What differentiates our podcast, I think, Rupert, is we're very much focused on the how. And I'm personally somewhat of a technique junkie. And I've found that something that's somewhat unique about your particular teaching is this dyadic questioning, kind of like Socratic dialogue that you have with students.
Yes.
And when you see somebody that's, everybody gives you their story, my relationship, my job, my money, whatever. What are you thinking, or what are you trying to do in your dialogue with them that is helping them get back to the place of seeing themselves as awareness?
Well, it's very difficult to answer that question in general, because I respond to each question individually. I simply try to answer the question, whatever it is. I don't come into a meeting with any prescription, with a syllabus, with an idea of where we're going. I usually do a brief contemplative introduction, then I open it for conversation, and I simply try to answer people's question. What the analogy that I sometimes use is that everyone is lost in the forest to a greater or lesser extent, but everyone is lost in the forest in a slightly different place.
Mm-hmm.
So my job as a teacher, for want of a better word, is not to give people prescriptions, not to respond to different answers with the same question, but to actually go to each place in the forest where someone is lost, and to start walking from that place back out of the forest or back home. And so that the understanding is tailored uniquely to every single, not just to every single person, but to every single question, because each question comes from a slightly different place in the forest. So that the teaching is, the teaching is really, it's created in the moment in response to these questions. Now, in practice, of course, I don't reinvent myself from scratch. Every time I hear a question, I have a certain language, a certain repertoire of my favorite images and favorite metaphors. But even so, these are not applied mechanically in response to a question. To the best of my ability, I try to tailor this understanding to each individual question, and not always the question that is verbalized, but more importantly, the question behind the question, the deeper question, which is very often is not verbalized explicitly, but is the real question behind the verbalized question, so to speak.
Mm-hmm. So if I'm a regular person saying, yeah, I got this situation with my wife that I've been thinking about, and we're having a hard time working through, what might you say?
Well, I would be very cautious giving specific advice to someone who asked me in a public meeting about their relationship. Mm-hmm. So I would answer it in very general terms. But I would need to know more. I know you want me to give you a taste of what I might say, but you haven't given me enough of a question to know. You see, I don't know what I'd say. Mm-hmm. I don't have a standard answer. It depends. It depends. I would need to know more. I would need to know.
Well, let me try, Jonathan, if it's okay, let me try a question that's sort of related to my life and also related to the subject at hand. Rupert, I know that you were a ceramic artist before you were a spiritual teacher, and I'm a singer and a cabaret artist, and I'm always wondering how to blend the spiritual life with the artistic life, because so much of an artist's attention, or actually, this is actually true of anyone in any profession, not just an artist, anyone who strives for excellence in their field, a lot of their thoughts and energy is taken up by concerns of the ego, such as, do people like my work, or How do I promote myself and my work? And I'm always worried that that concern might overshadow the deeper concern of finding happiness in our true nature of awareness.
Well, just to comment on something you said there, Brian, the concern, do people like my work or not? I agree, would in most cases be an egoic concern. But the concern, the question, how do I promote my work, is not necessarily an egoic concern. If you are an artist, let's take a painter painting away in your studio, you don't want to spend your life filling your studio full of works that nobody sees. Perfectly legitimate desire to want to get those works out into the world, because you are wanting to share your vision of the world with humanity, because you see the world in a way that you feel you are seeing the real world, so to speak, and you feel very strongly about that as an artist, and it's natural to want to share that. So you may gather together a series of drawings or paintings and go and visit your local gallery, or start a blog or a website. That's not an egoic concern. It's just part and parcel of being an artist. Mm-hmm. In fact, it would be possibly egoic to feel reticent to show one's work. If you thought, oh, I'm not good enough, nobody will like it, that would be egoic.
Mm-hmm. I see. Yeah, that makes total sense.
That would be coming from a shrunk sense of self. I'm no good. Mm-hmm. I'm not. That's the ego.
And the other way is just simply a practical way of sharing.
Yes. You have this view of the world which you want to share with your fellows, and so certain steps need to be taken to get your paintings from your studio out into society. So you call a gallery, you make a blog, whatever it is. That those are not. I don't consider those egoic. They're of course that they're related to your work, mm-hmm. but they are. It's impersonal. Your desire to show your work is in the service of beauty, or in the service of intelligence, or in the service of love. Any action that is in the service of, and thus expresses, communicates, and shares beauty, love, peace, justice, are not egoic activities, even though they are undertaken by an individual body mind. That they are impersonal desires, they are impersonal actions. Mm-hmm. That our conversation here, what is the impulse? What was your impulse, both of you, to do the work you do and to contact me? Was it a personal egoic desire? No, it comes from your love and enthusiasm for the truth, and for sharing that, and for making it as available to as many people as possible. Yes, it required your particular characters, Brian and Jonathan, who between you have these particular proclivities and skills and tendencies, and which enable you to do what you're doing and broadcast it to however many people you broadcast it. So you are using your skills, your body and your mind in the service of God, in religious language, in the service of truth and love and beauty. That's not impersonal, although it does require your individual body minds.
Right. Share the joy.
Yes.
Yeah, that would be our impulse for the podcast, or for any artistic endeavor that I might be involved in.
Exactly. Yes. I would go so far as to say that all true artistic endeavor was impersonal. That doesn't mean to say that it is not channeled through a very unique individual body mind. Mm-hmm. So it has a very unique individual expression, but contained within that expression is something that is beyond the person. It has a universality to it that speaks beyond the differences between individual people.
So the universal actually can be reached through the personal, or the personal can be a vehicle.
Yes, but all expression is limited.
Mhm.
The words we're using are limited. We're speaking English. We're not speaking Dutch or Chinese or Spanish. That they are limited. All expression of the infinite has to be channeled through the finite, and therefore is always couched in finite terms. All expression is by definition is finite, because if it was infinite, it would have no form, and therefore it would not be expressed. So any expression, however sublime it is, whether it's the Buddha or Rumi or Beethoven or whoever, it's always limited. But what it expresses is something that is beyond its limited form. It contains within it, so to speak, the unlimited.
Yes. Lovely.
I think that's a really good example of taking a question, that somebody has, and then bringing it so that there's a bigger picture, and Brian can let go of a little bit of a personalness and taste of what you're talking about.
But you see, it's interesting, and please don't misunderstand me, Jonathan. I don't mean this with any disrespect at all. I understand completely why you asked me the question you asked me, but it wasn't your question.
Right.
You said something like, how would you respond to somebody that asked? So, and of course I understand and appreciate why you said that, but your question left me cold. It wasn't a real, I couldn't feel it. And so I couldn't really answer you. I didn't want to give, it was a generic question, and I don't want to give you a generic answer. It would leave you and your listeners cold. However, Brian, and I think you could both feel that. So Brian then said, okay, I'm going to ask you a real question, something about my actual life. So then it immediately triggers a response. And I say something that I've never said before, because I've never had that question before.
Right.
So yes, that is an example of the understanding tailoring itself uniquely. It's still the universal understanding, but it's being tailored specifically to a question. And in this way, the non-dual teaching is not something that can be packaged. It can't be squeezed into a set of formulations or commandments, or it's something that is very alive and responsive. It never becomes a dogma or a religion. It's a tradition in the sense that it's a living flame of understanding that is passed on from generation to generation. But every time it is expressed freshly in response to the actual situation. And this is what prevents the non-dual teaching, the genuine non-dual teaching, from becoming a dogma. And all dogmas eventually, that they die. It's like eating, when we hear dogmatic spiritual teachings, it's like eating canned food. It fills you up, but you don't feel nourished. But when you eat freshly picked food, even if you don't have very much of it, it's so nourishing. You feel it because it's fresh, it's alive. The non-dual teaching should be like that, in my opinion.
That was a really wonderful example and explanation of that. And I really got something out of that. So thank you for that. That's it has to be alive and resonant with the moment.
Yes. And in that way, the teaching is free from any prescription. Mm-hmm. And one person may ask one question and the teaching will respond in one way, but another person may ask another question and the teaching may seem to contradict itself. And it's not really a contradiction. If you want to, if someone in Edinburgh asks you how you get to London, you say you fly south. If someone in Paris asks you how to get to London, you say you fly north. These are not contradictions, because the response has taken into account where we started. So there's this freedom, and this freedom from politically correct Advaita, a teaching that always answers every question. There's nobody here, there's nothing to do, everything appears in a way. There's nothing standard about it. It's alive and spontaneous. At the same time, there is also a thread of tradition that runs through and connects all the true expressions of the non-dual teaching, however diverse they may be.
Yeah, that's excellent. You know, my one difficulty with direct paths is that when I see some people use them, including myself sometimes, we can have a hard time integrating it into either our lives, or we can get to this place of deep peace and use that as a way of bypassing the difficult stuff that can come up in life.
Yes.
And I'm wondering if you see that and have any comment about those
Yes,
obstacles.
very much so. It's a very valid point, and a lot of people feel that the direct, and this is a misunderstanding, but it's no fault of the one who misunderstands. It's a misunderstanding that's quite common on the contemporary non-dual circuit. The complaint that the direct path is somehow a spiritual bypass, and it is not, doesn't deal with the very real issues of everyday life. Certainly the way I explain the non-dual teaching, the non-dual understanding, it has two aspects to it. And really I call them the inward-facing path and the outward-facing path. And the direct path really belongs to the inward-facing path. What I mean when I say inwards is we go, I don't mean into the body, I mean into the essence of ourselves, to the heart of our being, to the essence of the mind. It's a movement from the objects of experience, thoughts, feelings, activities, relationships, towards our essential self. So this first stage of the teaching, the direct path, the inward-facing path, does indeed involve a turning away from the objects of experience. And it is a spiritual bypass and I use that word in a positive sense. Mm-hmm. We don't pay attention to the content of our thoughts, sensations, and perceptions. We pay attention to that with which they are known, or that in which they appear. So we go directly from the object to the subject, and bypassing, if we want to use that phrase, or without paying attention to the object itself. However, and this brings us to the recognition, I am awareness. I am that which is aware, rather than anything that I am aware of. And this is the first step, the recognition, the great recognition. What I essentially am is awareness. Now, that recognition is not yet what is traditionally called enlightenment or awakening, although it is a step on the path. What is called traditionally enlightenment or awakening is not just the recognition I am awareness, but the recognition of the nature of awareness, that awareness is ever present and unlimited. That is what another way of saying what Brian read out in your introduction, Brian, when you said that I mentioned at one stage that awareness doesn't share the limits and the destiny of the body-mind. Mm-hmm. It doesn't share the limits. In other words, it is unlimited. It doesn't share the destiny. It doesn't die. It wasn't born, and it doesn't die. It is ever present. So this recognition, not just I am awareness, but the awareness that I am is ever present and without limits, and that its nature is peace and happiness. It is peace itself. That recognition is what is traditionally called enlightenment. And in this approach, that recognition is really only halfway, if that. Let's call it halfway. Once that has been glimpsed, once our true nature has been glimpsed or recognized, it is then necessary to turn outwards again, towards the objects of experience from which we previously turned away. And we now turn towards them from the perspective of our new understanding. And we try to sense the body and perceive the world in a way that is consistent with our new understanding that everything appears in consciousness, is known by consciousness, and is made of consciousness. And this turning outwards again towards the object of experience is what I call the outward-facing path. And it is the path that is made most explicit in the tantric traditions, whereas the inward-facing path is the path that is made most explicit in the Vedantic tradition. And I feel that it is very important for a complete spiritual teaching to have a balanced approach between turning away from the objects of experience and returning to the source of awareness. But then so that is the transcendent aspect of the teaching, but not taking refuge in transcendent awareness, but turning back again towards the objects of experience. And this is the immanent aspect of the teaching, and incorporating all realms of one's experience, or rather aligning all realms of one's experience with this new understanding. And that prevents this approach being a spiritual bypass, because sooner or later, every aspect of one's life, the difficulties we encounter in relationships, in health, in earning our living, in bringing up our children, in living in the community, the local, that sooner or later, they are all, everything is brought up and has to be aligned with this understanding.
What do you mean by aligned with this understanding? Can you say anything more about that?
Well, let's take the example of a relationship. If it is clear to us that our essential being is ever present and without limits, then it becomes clear to us that our being is everybody's being. There cannot be more than one unlimited being. So if there were more than one unlimited being, then each of those two beings would both start somewhere and stop somewhere, not to mention 7 billion limited beings. So the implication of the recognition of our true nature is that we all share our being. Our thoughts are different, our feelings are different, our sensations and perceptions are different, but our being is what unites us all. Now, previously, before this recognition, we consider that our being is separate from everybody else's being, and therefore what we do to another, we don't feel that we do it to ourselves. However, once it is clear to us that the being of everybody, not just the being of those we feel close to and love, but the being of everybody, including the people that we don't feel close to and don't particularly love, it is all one shared being. Now, imagine how it would be if we were to lead our life and particularly relate to everyone, if this understanding were to inform our interactions with those people. Not just our interactions with our loved one, with our children, but were to inform our interaction with everybody. The person at the checkout that we pay, the cab driver, the everybody. If our relationships were all informed by this understanding, how would that transform relationship? Imagine, for instance, I'm now going to take two political figures to make a statement. Imagine if Kim Jong-un and President Trump both understood that despite the differences in their thoughts and feelings, the being that each of them knows themselves to be, in other words, the simple being that they each refer to when they say I, was the same being. Now imagine if both of them had that simple knowledge. They still have all their whatever political ideas they want, but that was their primary knowledge, was the knowledge that their being was shared with everyone and with one another. How would that affect the content and the quality of their communication? Imagine if politicians were to understand this. I mean, of course, it's easy to understand if you and I were to understand this, how this would affect if before we interacted with anyone, we first held in our hearts this understanding that whoever it is we are speaking with, however different our thoughts and opinions may be, in our hearts, we are one. We can feel the impact. Even just imagining that gives us a taste of the quality of relationship that would ensue as a result of this understanding. But think of it on a broader scale. If this knowledge became common knowledge, and the leaders of our institutions and our societies understood this, what an impact it would have on our world community. It's such a simple understanding.
Mm-hmm. Great, that's helpful.
I believe that if there is ever to be lasting world peace, I don't mean a fragile alliance between nations brought about by exchanging ideas and making compromises. I mean a lasting world peace. It will have to come from the simple recognition that at the heart of ourselves, we are all one. That single idea, if fully understood, would inevitably have to express itself as harmony within individuals, but harmony between individuals, communities, and nations.
That would be a revolution I could really get behind.
It would be indeed, yes. Yes.
Wonderful.
And it's not a revolution that comes from subscribing to any beliefs. It's not about persuading people to believe this as opposed to that. It's just an investigation of the nature of what everybody refers to when they say simply, I.
Yeah. And that makes sense to me too, because I find in dealing with the world that not one other person has to believe this for me to feel like everyone is me.
Yes, this is nothing to do with belief. I often say to people, if you were to have the choice either to believe what I was saying or not to believe it, I genuinely recommend you not to believe it. The fact that we're having this conversation or they're attending one of my meetings means that they are obviously already open to it. Mm-hmm. But I would recommend be skeptical, be open to it, but be skeptical. But above all, put it to the test. To take the thought I. What do you refer to? Go to that in your experience to which you refer when you say simply I. When you say, I am aware of my thoughts, what is this I that is aware of your thoughts or your sensations? Or what is its nature? Find out for yourself. Don't believe anybody, however high the authority might be. Because the highest authority is always our own experience.
Yes. That's right. And
I have...
go ahead.
Go on, Brian.
No, I was just going to... Actually, it would just be icing on the cake to that. Why don't you go ahead, Jonathan?
I just have one last question. And that is, Rupert, you've gone through many changes in your own life. And I'm wondering how you deal with how you experience or deal with negative emotions now that might have been different than 30 years ago. Like, how is your experience when the car cuts you off, when the internet doesn't work? How would you say that you experience life differently?
Well, 20 or 30 years ago, a negative emotion had the power to consume me, to eclipse whatever peace or happiness was present in my experience, not just for a few moments or even for a few hours, but for days at a time, like a dense cloud that descends. And over the years, from a relatively early age, as you know, I've been exploring these matters, investigating my true nature, and I was always interested in the direct path. Who am I? What is it that knows my experience? What is the essential nature of myself? And in this way, there is in my mind a very well-trodden path from the objects of experience to the subject of experience. Now, in the early days, it took me a while to take the path from a feeling of upset, hurt, jealousy, confusion. It took some time to find my way out of the forest, back to my essential self. But every time you travel that path, it becomes shorter and easier. And it's become such a habit in me now that it's really no longer even a pathway. If some experience takes place which triggers some kind of negativity, it's before it really takes root in me and begins to pervade my body and my mind. There is this. It's not verbal anymore. It's this immediate. It's a kind of pre-verbal impulse. But who is the I that is upset? And although I no longer actually formulate that question to myself, it's as if the essence of that question just presents itself, and I'm taken to the background. And the negative feeling, it cannot grow. So it dissipates like a cloud. It may take a few moments to dissipate, but it's not present long enough to grow roots in me.
That's a wonderful description. We don't get descriptions like that very much. And since most people are somewhere in that process, it's helpful to know exactly how that transpired in you and that those little moments make a difference.
You've heard of an Indian sage called Atmananda Krishna Menon. Somebody asked him once, how do you know when you're established in your true nature? And he said, when the thoughts, feelings, sensations, and perceptions can no longer take you away from yourself. And that's really a beautiful response. None of us know what's around the corner. So we can never say never. I would never say never. But in time, I noticed that fewer and fewer thoughts, feelings, sensations and perceptions have the ability to eclipse the inherent peace of my true nature. And if such a thought or feeling does appear, as I said before, it doesn't have such deep roots. It has a kind of transparency to it and is fairly quickly dissolved in the innate peace of awareness.
Well, that's something that I would wish for all of our listeners and their friends and loved ones and world leaders. Beautiful.
Yes.
Anything, Brian, you want to add before we ask Rupert for a guided meditation?
Oh, I think this would be a lovely time to do a guided meditation if you're willing, Rupert.
Of course. Yes. Well, we've been talking the whole of this last hour or so about our true nature, that to which we refer when we say I. So let's investigate that. What do we mean when we say I? We have been calling ourselves I all our life. I dreamt of a Caribbean beach last night. I slept well last night. I had dinner with a friend yesterday. I got married last year. I went to university 10 years ago, etc., etc. When we were 5-year-old children, we called ourselves I. Our thoughts, images, feelings, activities, relationships have changed innumerable times since then, but I is the one element of experience that has remained continuously present throughout all experience. So ask yourself the question, what is that? What element of my experience remains present throughout my dreams, throughout deep sleep, and has been with me all my life. What is that? I is that part of myself which cannot be removed from myself. Thoughts are continuously appearing and disappearing. Images, feelings, memories, bodily sensations, perceptions of the world, activities, relationships, always appearing and disappearing. But I is like a golden thread that runs through a beaded necklace. The beads on the necklace are the objects of experience. The golden thread runs through them all. What is it that runs continuously throughout all your experience? Only that is worthy of the name I. I refers to that part of ourself that cannot be removed from ourself. What is always with you? That is the true friend, the one element of our experience that never leaves us, never abandons us, never lets us down, never changes, is always in the same condition. Thoughts, images, feelings are always changing, but I, the one that is aware of them, never changes. The I that we referred to as 5-year-old children is in exactly the same condition as the I that we refer to now. It doesn't age. It is never tarnished by experience. It is never moved or changed by experience. It cannot be hurt or damaged or harmed by experience. It cannot be agitated by experience, and thus its nature is peace. And no experience adds anything to it or removes anything from it. In other words, it is complete or whole, fulfilled, inherently fulfilled. And thus its nature is happiness. All that is necessary to do to find the peace and the happiness for which all people long, above all else, is to go to the very heart of yourself. Everything that you have ever truly longed for lives there.
That feels wonderful to me.
Me too. Thank you, Rupert.
Well, it's a pleasure to meet you both. And
we're so grateful that you could be a guest on Awareness Explorers. Thank you so much. What were you saying? I interrupted you.
No, I was just saying it was a pleasure that technology can facilitate a meeting like this. And it's very nice to spend this hour or so together. Thank you both.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you very much.
Where could people go to find out more about your books and retreats and such?
The best place is to my website, which is www.rupertspira.com, or just type Rupert Spira, and then everything is there, retreats, books, and everything. And for video clips, just type Rupert Spira into YouTube. There are hundreds of videos there.
Riches.
Very grateful. Thank you for your wisdom and sharing it so eloquently.
I'm grateful to both of you too. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Jonathan.
And keep exploring.
Keep exploring. Thank you for listening to Awareness Explorers. To learn more, you can check out our website at awarenessexplorers.com. Please subscribe to our podcast on iTunes, Google Play, or your favorite podcast app. And we'd love it if you would post a review. And please share our link on Facebook and with family and friends, because knowing yourself as awareness is the greatest gift you can give yourself or someone you love.